So this is our last meeting, and we have an extra hour, but we'll see, because it's a small group, maybe we'll go through things faster and we won't even need the extra time, but that way I have some things prepared to present, and then if you have anything that you want to share with us, like I know Ahmad prepared something from the first exercise that he was going to share with us. And so if you want to share your ideas for your film idea that you've been thinking about, you can we can use that time at the end, whether you're trying to get feedback or talk about that. First, does anybody have questions or thoughts about yesterday? So yesterday, some of you were here, some of you weren't, but we looked at some kind of comparative approaches from early anthropology and related fields. So we looked at a film by Margaret Mead that maybe some of you had seen before. We looked at this film by Ray Birdwhistle that was trying to use film as a tool to study nonverbal communication. As a kind of, so both making this kind of more scientific approach to thinking about how film could be used as a tool to teach anthropology or other kinds of social science. And then we looked at the kind of observational mode that emerged with people like David McDougall. And then as a kind of continuation of that, but more extreme experimentation, we looked at the kind of sensory mode. So thinking about how, so all of them thinking about like how film can do something special regarding the study of culture that text can't, that language can't. And so sort of this rejection of text or a rejection of language, or trying to think beyond the linguistic and using film for that in different ways. Does anybody want to ask any questions about that, or talk about their thoughts about that afterwards? I think one thing that we can also think about that's interesting for me with some of these things that are sort of like failed experiments, like the bird whistle, like that we wouldn't see used very often in anthropology today, for example. It's still easy for me to see how you might take that form and play with it if you're making something more like an experimental film that wasn't meant to be too traditionally ethnographic, or how you might sort of play with the form of comparison, but in a way that is less essentializing than what some of those early attempts were doing. Today we're going to talk about some different tendencies that we could see as being related to each other. So I'm sort of mashing all together ideas about reflexivity and what a kind of reflexive mode can look like on film, along with different experiments with collaboration and kind of more autoethnographic modes. So it's kind of lots of different things that aren't the same thing, but coming together to think about how if a kind of classic problematic way of making a film is the person with the camera making a film about some kind of an other who's on the other side of the camera, all of these modes are trying to interrupt that in different ways. And we've seen examples of this happening already in some of the films that we've seen. So I guess maybe in small groups you can just talk about, so what, like when we talk about reflexivity, we sometimes when different people talk about reflexivity, they're talking about different things. So what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be reflexive in a film or through a film? And where have we already seen some examples of some kind of reflexivity happening in the films, in some of the films that we've seen. And then the last question is, does that need to happen in front of the camera? Does the viewer need to be able to see that reflexivity or not? So, do those questions make sense? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Etnografija to nije oblik. Mislim, to postoji nešto da nije oblik. Kad god pišeš tekst ili snimaš film, ti unosiš se, razumiješ što postoji oblik i gospodin.
Specijalno time što se nabrao temu sve ono što se zapravo.
Si uvijek smiđali koji prostoji, tako da ne možeš biti nikad dobiti. Čak i pišu predstavnika, mislim, on kao treba biti. U principu uvijek nosiš se onak što je neka tvoja, što si ti kroz tekst, kroz film. Tako da to s objektivnošću, to ne postoji.
He does that in Chronicle some questions. Yeah, and they watch footage that they film with the people. Yeah.
Onda ne znam da bi se brao da si uopće snimio. Bar ne znam da sam sam već kam.
Da, normalno da. Kad radiš emisiju, kad radiš film, pogotovo ne scenarije, uvijek pišeš ono nešto što ima veze. Najčešće s tim životom. Mislim, ne treba biti copy-paste, nego nešto što ti je dalo. Podsjećam nešto, malo izmjeniš, biti tako priča su najbolje. Ne znam, nekako nema nikad.
Okay, let's talk together, and maybe since we're a smaller group today, we can actually let everyone introduce themselves, which I didn't want to try to do when there were 30 of you, and I should have done yesterday. I'll just go around, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and then you can say what's one thing that your group talked about regarding reflexivity, what it is, how you define it, or some example that you think we've seen, some moment that seems like a moment of reflexivity. Do you want to start?
Yeah, my name is Amar Darwish, and with the group we talked about the necessity of having this modality because it permits to focus and to follow a better structure, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
My name is Sandra. I'm an ethnologist, and I also like editing. So reflexivity, I think it's one thing that is needed to be present in every film, because it's our way to see that reality that we want to present. I don't know. So that's a piece of us in the film.
Okay. So for you, your reflexivity is a piece of the filmmaker in the film,
Yeah.
so that we're aware of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
My impression, I don't know.
Yeah.
My name is Nina. I was with Sandra in group, and yeah, we talked about how it's hard to not be subjective in film, because everything you show is something you want to show. It's not your presence at filming, just as it is subjective. So yeah, reflectivity is something we must have. It's essential to the film.
Okay. Yeah, and I think a lot of people would argue that you can't. There's no way to be completely objective, but showing some of that subjectivity is a way of at least being honest about that relationship.
And it's usually more interesting to see a subjective maybe film than fully objective.
Okay. Yeah. Some attempt to be objective if it's possible. Yeah.
Me? Okay, my name is Vida, and
Vito?
Vida.
Okay.
They said everything, but yeah, we were talking about the same thing, like how even when there isn't like direct reflexivity, that it shows through montage and
Okay.
editing.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Anuk, and as everyone has said, it's really hard to be objective, and just by being there with the camera is, let's say, a little bit subjective. Also, how you represent what you've seen, and with the voiceover yesterday, what we saw, or not the voiceover, but the editing, it really depends how you present it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I remember I was presenting some of my some videos that I had taken in my fieldwork, and there was a psychologist there, and she was arguing that what I should have done is I should have just set up the camera in a kind of hidden place. This was in a room of children, and I was interested in how the children were playing. I should have set up the camera and walked out, and that's how I could really study their natural play without interrupting them. But then the problem with that is the times when I even tried to do that, I couldn't understand anything that's going on. So part of that subjectivity is also developing the relationship, because you can have a different kind of understanding of what's going on if you have a human relationship with people than if you're just setting up a camera, a security camera in the corner and observing that. It's hard to know what's going on, right? Okay.
I'm Lea. Well, they said everything that we talked about, but I will just repeat that it's almost impossible to make a movie without some sort of reflexivity. I mean, when you choose a subject of the movie topic, you are reflexive at the moment, so subjective. You represent your opinion through the whole start of the making of the film.
Okay, so yeah, in that way it's subjective in that it's not that you just chose something out of a hat, but you chose it because it was something that was interesting for you, right?
Yeah.
And I guess one thing that I would say is maybe every film has that, but we don't always see that when we're watching the film. Like, we don't always hear like what was their motivation for making that, and that might be something that if an author chooses to put that on the camera, like what's my personal relationship to that, then that might be a kind of more reflexive moment that we see in front of the camera. Yeah.
I'm Mia, and yes, as everyone said, we have already said it a lot, but I'm a big fan of objectivity, but I think it's much easier to do when, for example, writing a scientific paper on a subject than making a film, because film immerses you a little bit more, and also, as you said, you really need to film. Just the act of making a film is a little bit more intrusive, or a lot more intrusive than just observing. So you really need to you need to build relationships with your subjects, and that can even be a non-living subject, but you have to be interested enough. So I think it's pretty much impossible to not have some kind of subjectivity in a film, but I personally prefer when it's a little bit more implicit than explicit. Yeah.
Okay, and why is that?
Because sometimes being very explicit can, just my opinion, can come off as patronizing to the viewer, and I maybe prefer when you present something. You obviously just by filming and editing, you already decide what you're going to show, and even the sound can be very can affect the viewer a lot. So you're already trying to affect the viewer. So I don't think it's necessary to be. So okay, a radical example is the person we watched yesterday who filmed in the zoos, and his voiceover was something that's very explicit, and it was okay. It was very much making us see it from his point of view. Obviously, it's a little bit different nowadays in more modern films, but still, I prefer more implicit films like I don't know, Land of Honey. Anyway,
the Northern Macedonian one about the honey?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's just, that's something that comes to mind as something that is a very it's a complicated subject. A lot of things are touched upon in the film, but we never even see the filmmakers. We never get their point of view except from editing. So that's something that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess the bird whistle example. I don't know if I would. I guess I would just say I don't know if I would call him. I don't know if I would describe him as being very reflexive about his mode of presenting it. So he's making it clear that he's giving us this kind of authoritative perspective on how to interpret it, but he's not. I guess I'm like, what my idea about like a more reflexive mode would be him being a little bit more self-conscious about the fact that he is studying this from a particular vantage point of, okay, I'm an American white middle-aged male, and how does that position shape the way in which I'm interpreting this, and how might there be problems with that? Would be a kind of more like reflexive mode, which we don't see him doing when he is, for those of you who didn't see this yesterday, he's looking at people at the zoo in 10 different settings across, like all over the world. He's interested in their nonverbal communication, and he's interpreting that for us without being kind of self-critical about what are the limitations that he has, which would be kind of what I would think of as more of a sort of reflexive mode, if that makes sense. Amar?
It's just I wanted to add something, which is what for me would be interesting is to present subjectivity through other means than commentary. An example that comes in mind when I ask myself this question is, for example, again, this idea of hidden camera and doing something very taboo with two actors and seeing how people react and then asking their permission if we can use this footage, or should we change their voice and hide their faces, because what we want is the content. And it's like long ago I saw this YouTube video about so the setup was in a train in France, and you know in France there is this whole issue with hijab, veil for Muslim women. So there is one actress, white woman, and one hijab woman, and the white woman says, "How dare you wear this? This is a land of freedom." And the other, like they take the most extreme argument from both communities, and people react. And I think it's a good way to implement subjectivity without even having to say it, you know, like, because you have everything as a visual, and this is where visual becomes relevant. It's just this relation between objectivity, because you show something, you just watch, but subjectivity through how and what you say to your actors or your crew or the setup.
Okay. Yeah, and that's also kind of an example of some kind of an intervention. That they're, and are they explicit about the fact that it is an intervention? After each
intervention, if there is a lot of like intention to it, because sometimes there is no intention, people can be like, we don't care about it, and which is also for me, silence is also a reaction, which is interesting. But they always ask for it, and for me, the most important aspect of it is like respect for every important factors in this setup, which are the actors. You respect both opinion. You don't try to lead like whether the white woman or the Muslim woman is right. You just respect both point of view. You respect the people that don't know their film, and I think you can do something great with it. Very raw, you know.
Yeah, and I guess something you're calling attention to is there can be a kind of a mode of reflexivity that's being clear about what's happening with the camera as a type of intervention into daily life that doesn't necessarily have to be reflection about the filmmaker themselves, because something else that people complain about sometimes with the reflexive mode is that it can become this kind of navel gazing, or it's calling so much attention to yourself when really the goals are to hear the stories of other people or the daily lives of other people, right? How about in the back, what were some things that you discussed regarding reflexivity, and any examples of moments that we've seen already that were reflexive moments, or that you've seen in other films, or... And, sorry, what's your name?
Timna. My name is Timna.
Timna?
Yeah.
Okay.
The movie watched
No, we didn't watch it. I mentioned it.
Okay.
Where Rouge watches. So Jean Rouge watches the footage with the people he films. So this reflexivity and polar. Because awareness that you're in fact watching a film, and there's a whole process behind.
Yeah, so you mentioned that I like the way he explicitly states what he will be doing with this in his research, in his experiments. And I asked him if there was some type of post-research. Yeah, but what I wanted to say was in terms of reflexivity, that I would agree with Amar, that it is very important to establish a relationship with the people you're working with, not like this type of fit and run situation. And what I found interesting, I'm sorry I forgot her name, but the girl who talked about sound, in terms of inexplicitly I mean, with sound it's interesting that like whether it's natural sounds or like silence or doing a score for a film, that it definitely affects emotions of the viewer, which I find interesting because like with that and with the visuals in terms of the way you're presenting, what are you presenting, it's much more open to interpretation. And with the first example, I mean, you already kind of said it with like explicitly stating, okay, I will be doing this, I will be doing that. There's a fine line between implementing too much of yourself into your work. Yeah. Those are my comments.
Yeah, and I think that there are ways in which you can have that be a little bit more implicit in terms of leaving in some moments maybe when people are talking to you while you're behind the camera, for example, rather than cutting that out and trying to sort of erase yourself from the film entirely. So those are decisions. So those are things that might be happening all the time when you're filming, and then when you're editing, you might decide to cut those out, or you might decide to cut out those moments when you're talking to the person to ask them a question, right? Or you might decide to leave those in so that you're explicit about the fact that you're asking them to say this rather than sort of coaching them and then cutting that out so that it seems like they just spontaneously came up with this statement that they made, right? Great.
Okay. God damn it, I have to finish. Yeah, so I am Nicola, and so next to, so like, aside from pretty much everything we've said, is I also I wanted to agree with Vida, I think, right? In that like, the kind of, and this is something we talked about yesterday with the film set in Australia with the Aboriginal community, right? Is that kind of like, even when there's no sort of like explicit kind of, I guess, kind of explicit like voice of the creator, you know, voice like of the ethnographer or whatever you want to call him, there's still this kind of faint like idea with you know, with the sort of editing of the movie and stuff like that, it kind of reveals the sort of like a more kind of implicit reflexivity in the sense of like not just what you leave in, but also kind of like what you kind of leave, what you omit, right? Like what you kind of leave on the, you know, on the cutting room floor, like where you like very explicitly kind of choose what you want to show rather than what you don't want to show, that like doesn't sort of correlate with your like the I guess the kind of thesis of what you want to make, of like what you want, kind of the story that that you want to tell, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and that some of that also might be kind of intuitive, and that the camera person might not even be extremely conscious of why it is they're following what they're following in the moment, but to what extent you can sort of take time afterwards to think about that, to reflect upon that, and think about why is it that I followed this person and not this person, and to what extent you want to show that explicitly versus leaving the viewer to think about it. Okay. And so in terms of other examples of reflexivity, we'll talk more about Hlush today, but I think even in the film that we did see the clip of, the fact that he's explicit about the kind of intervention he's making in front of the camera, we could say that that's one type of reflexivity. He says, these are my motivations, and now I'm going to show us having this conversation with the high school kids to plan out this, rather than just starting with a moment of action, compared to like what Flaherty does in terms of using these fictional modes. And then we can also think today about different ways of collaborating. The Hlush example that we saw, right? would be one example of a collaboration. Can you think of, are there any other films that we've seen where there's some kind of clear, more collaborative mode that we've seen? I can't think of anything, but we'll look at some another example from Plush today. But and what about autoethnography and another type of documentary film about oneself? Like, what makes something autoethnography and not a kind of just as opposed to some other type of personal documentary film?
The conscious use of the ethnographic method, I guess.
Okay. Do you want to say more about that?
I'm on my period, so no.
Maybe like just a second, I had something in mind. The difference between ethnography represents some type of culture, whether it's autoethnography or just anything else. So when we are doing autoethnography, we should be a part of that culture. I think so.
Okay. Yeah, and I would say, we all are a part of some culture or different cultures in different ways, however we're defining the limits of a culture, but if that is maybe like something that we want, I guess I would say something that makes a film have some kind of ethnographic value is that it's showing something related to a culture or a group and showing something of a kind of habit or daily life or something like that, that is not purely individual. So even if even if I'm focusing on myself as an individual or on my situatedness within this milieu, that one of the goals is to show something about that culture, subculture, group, community, rather than it being something that is purely psychological or purely about my complicated relationship with my family or how much I love my pet or something like that, if that makes sense. So that's what I think. But I guess sometimes it's not always clear to me when people talk about doing autoethnography what they mean by that, as opposed to just doing something that's a very personal take. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of these different modes. First, in terms of collaboration, since we've already watched a film by Rouge, maybe we'll come back to this at the end and watch a clip of it if we have time. But I just wanted to point out that we talked last weekend about the fact that Safi Faye started out as an actress in one of his films and then went on to study anthropology and filmmaking and made ethnographic and fiction films of her own. But he also had other actors who he collaborated with for decades, some of them, and they would sort of come up with ideas for films together, even if they were always, so Zika is one of his most famous collaborators and friends, and they would come up with ideas together to do these kind of fictional ethnographic films that would include Zika giving his voiceover rather than Plush doing the voiceover. So they would film all of this, and then they would go back and look at it together, and then Zika would construct his voiceover. And there were other people he worked with who then also became pioneering filmmakers in Africa. So that's one example of a kind of collaborative relationship. but I think regarding that, something that's interesting is even when he engages in this collaborative mode, that he's very explicit about the fact that they're collaborating together, still at the end of the day he gets the credit of this is a film by Jean Rouch, it's not this. So there's this, he's very famous for having theorized this idea of shared anthropology, and I think that we see that coming through in different films of his in lots of different really interesting ways. But there's a way in which he continues to take authorship, sole authorship for those films, that we might think about to what extent that should have changed, or if there's a way in which he's sort of taking responsibility for the film as well. And yeah, I mean, I guess there's still this question then of to what extent it's possible to have some kind of collaboration that is really shared equally if you're the one with sort of access to the funds and the camera and the equipment, and you have more of the expert knowledge of the sort of technical abilities of filmmaking. Yeah. Does anybody have thoughts about that, or about some kind of collaborative possibilities with film, with people who are not professional filmmakers?
Well, I hope the people who are in filmmaking have, some kind of thoughts about collaborating with people who are not professionals in filmmaking, because part of us are not, I guess. So
Okay.
it'd be good to hear from them.
Yeah, so is there anybody with yeah, I guess it's one thing that is different about us. We don't have many of us here who are coming from more of an anthropology background. We don't necessarily have some kind of expert knowledge of how to make films either. So in that way, it could be an advantage if we want to have something that's more on even terrain, and that we is there anyone with more expert knowledge who's tried to work with someone with less expert knowledge on filmmaking itself? What about for those of us who maybe don't have as much technical experience with filmmaking, but you could say that coming from this background of having studied anthropology is its own kind of expert knowledge, or it's its own kind of I mean, it means that we're coming into the filmmaking project with our own set of questions, right? So to what extent does that shape the ways in which we're going to approach a project? And if we're collaborating with somebody who doesn't have any idea what is the difference between an ethnographic film or versus a documentary film, or they don't have the same ideas about that as we do, is that going to shape how we might collaborate with them? Or
It's possible to collaborate. I mean, I collaborated with sculptors and with filmmakers, and it depends on the person and if they are open to your ways of presentation, and they, of course, you have to listen to them, what's the best way in filmmaking. So if you find the same language and the way of working, it's possible. It's never 50-50, of course, but it depends on the person and on the project.
I think it might depend a lot on how ready is the filmmaker to give the final say to someone who he's collaborating with, because it is possible, especially when you and not only in film, but also when you do some kind of a paper on some subjects, that the person who, or people who you are talking to in the end aren't comfortable with some things that show up during the procedure of making a film or a paper. So it really, a lot of it comes down to how ready are you to fight for your idea of what that film is going to be. Sometimes I think that filmmakers are more ready to sacrifice someone's comfort level than their own film, the subject of the film that has come up. But obviously it would be great if there was a way to put on a scale and make it even someone's comfort level and the delicate subjects that we handle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess to a certain extent, at the end of the day, for example, Jean-Louis acknowledging the fact that he's the one who's making the final decision about what this film looks like, then him calling it, this is, in the end, a film by me, is another way of sort of being explicit about that fact. So although in front of the camera we can see that there's this collaboration, there's this discussion about it, at the end of the day, it is my voice and it is my vision. And so then I'm the one who has to be responsible for what's doing, because I wasn't willing to give that up to that extent. So that kind of brings us back to these questions of reflexivity, I think. And I think also this question of like, what is 50% if we're thinking about a work that is artistic and creative, how do we even quantify, like what does it mean to give 50%? I think another thing that I wanted to point out is there are different ways to be reflexive, and some of that can happen in front of the camera during the film itself, and so we've talked about some different examples of Louche. Then there are other ways in which people will have separate films where they kind of revisit past films that they have made or past subjects that they have engaged in, and the whole film is a kind of reflection on that relationship. So there's this film by Jean Rouge called, well, it's not by him actually, it's, let me show it to you. It's where he's being interviewed by a filmmaker decades after, and talking about his first film, and having a conversation about that. And I'll show a couple of minutes of it because I think it's an interesting example of a kind of very retrospective reflexivity about some of the problems with an early film.
Un réalisateur qui sortait de la première IDEC me dit « Allez voir tel producteur ». Je vais voir les producteurs, il me dit « Oui, je vous finance si vous emmenez Ferlandais à Tombouctou ». Je vais venir à Tombouctou, chacun ses goûts, mon petit. Bon, alors tu vois, et on n'a pas emmené Fernand à Tombouctou, il y a un copain qui s'appelle Séchant, Protis Séchant, me dit, va donc acheter une caméra 16 mm, c'est formidable. Et ça se trouve au puce. Et je vais au puce trouver les vieilles caméras de l'armée américaine. Et je pars pour tourner. Après la guerre, quand nous sommes rentrés en France, avec mes copains de l'école des ponts, on a cherché du travail en France. Et je suis allé voir des directeurs d'entreprise. Par exemple, le monsieur j'avais fait un stage sur le pont de Saint-Cloud, le pont que tu prends pour aller à Saint-Cloud, la première pile, c'est moi qui l'ai faite, en 1938. Alors je vais voir le monsieur qui était là, qui s'est rendu célèbre, il avait fait après ça le mur de l'Atlantique, et c'était un ancien de notre école, et je vais lui demander du boulot. Il me dit oui, très bien, oui. Mais qu'est-ce que vous avez fait pendant ces 4 ans? Alors je lui dis, moi, j'ai fait la guerre. Il me dit, quel temps perdu. Alors je me suis levé, j'ai pas claqué la porte, je suis sorti. J'ai vu mes copains, et avec mes copains, on a décidé qu'à partir de ce moment-là, on ferait ce qu'on voudrait. On avait payé notre dette à la France, on n'avait rien à en faire. Et donc on a essayé de faire de la philosophie, de la littérature. On a créé un personnage imaginaire, Jean-Pierre Jean, qui était journaliste, Jean Rouge, Pierre Ponty, Jean Sauvy. On a travaillé avec AFP, on faisait 3 articles par semaine, et avec ça, on vivait comme des princes. Et un jour, on se dit, il faut retourner en Afrique. On a décidé de repartir tous les 3 et de descendre le Niger en Tyrol. On descend depuis la Guinée, depuis la région du nord de Sibérie. On passe à Parana, on passe à Kouroussa, etc. Et je tournais avec une caméra, je ne connaissais rien au cinéma, et je tournais dans une pirogue qui avance comme ça, un coup à droite, un coup à gauche. Quand j'ai voulu monter ça, quand j'avais tourné à droite, sur l'écran, le paysage défilait de la gauche vers la droite, et de l'autre côté, défilait de la droite vers la gauche. Tu ne veux pas raccorder, puisque tu as boum, boum. Alors, heureusement, on s'est arrêté à un moment donné. Et quand on s'est arrêté, il y avait une chasse à l'hippopotame au harpon, dans une île juste à la frontière de l'actuel Mali et du Niger. Et je réalise un film avec tout ce qu'il fallait, la préparation des harpons, la chasse, avec tout un rituel où on demande au génie de l'eau des hippopotames. Bon, je rentre ici à Paris, je m'aperçois que tout ce qu'on a fait par ailleurs n'est pas valable, sauf ce petit bout. Alors je monte un film d'une demi-heure, je le présente ici au musée de l'Homme. On voulait faire l'ethnologie, je le présente à des gens qui s'appelaient Leroy-Gourand, Lévi-Strauss, Marcel Villot, Michel Léris. Et les gens disent, oui c'est bien, voilà un exemple où la caméra peut servir à quelque chose, la description d'une technique et d'un rituel. Bon, j'étais content parce que j'avais gagné une manche avec les ethnologues. À ce moment-là, il y a Michel Léris qui me dit, si on allait présenter ce film, il faut l'orienter. L'orienter, c'était une des premières caves de Saint-Germain après la guerre, qui était rue des Carmes à Moubert. Et dans la cave, un hôtel qui s'appelait L'Orienté, jouait Claude Luther et c'est L'Orienté, il jouait la musique Nouvelle-Orléans. Bon, on leur propose de voir un film, bien sûr qu'ils sont ravis, voilà le film, bravo, bravo. Et puis, à ce moment-là, le pianiste de Claude Luther vient me trouver en me disant, il s'appelait Christian Aziz. Et il me dit, mon papa est le directeur des actualités françaises. Ça l'intéresserait peut-être de produire ce film. Et on va montrer le film au papa, il vient ici le voir au musée de l'Homme, il dit d'aller, à faire c'est mauvais, c'est foutu comme la zépique, ça vaut rien, mais nous prenons ça en charge, on fera un 10 minutes, c'est-à-dire on fera une bobine, c'est-à-dire 300 mètres en 35, 10 minutes. Vous me faites un petit texte pour dire ce que ça veut dire, mais nous allons agrandir le film en 35 parce qu'on ne peut pas monter en 16, et vous nous laissez tout. Le commentaire, la musique, le montage, on rajoutera peut-être des plans et le titre. Et un jour, on voit un monstre qui s'appelait au pays les mages noirs. C'est un truc vraiment... c'est ce qu'on dit, on essaye de discuter, mais il n'y a pas d'argent, on achète. On voit le film et on découvre qu'il avait introduit non pas des éléphants d'Asie effectivement, mais des lions, il y avait des antilopes, il y avait des trucs comme ça. Il avait mis des vues de forêt qu'il avait pris dans ses stock-shots. La musique, c'était de la musique à la confiture, c'est une sorte de marché persan. Et le commentaire était dit par le type qui faisait le commentaire du Tour de France. Et voilà que l'hippopotame, etc. C'était horrible, horrible. Et on se dit, c'est pas possible. Et ce film a marché. Il a marché. Et les gens qui le voyaient me disaient, c'est formidable, un jour je vais le revoir. Et j'ai vu, curieusement, qu'il y avait quelque chose qui n'était pas dans le premier. Et c'était la fin. Et cette fin, c'était un scandale pour moi. Ils avaient trouvé dans ce film, il y avait une danse de possession pour demander au génie de l'eau de tuer un hippopotame. Et le génie de l'eau disait, tuez un mouton blanc sur les harpons et tout ira bien. Et là, comme cette danse de possession était dramatique, et c'est très dramatique, un rituel de possession, ils l'ont mis à la fin, c'est le génie de l'eau qui remerciait, ou c'est les pêcheurs qui remerciaient le génie de l'eau de vendre l'hippopotame. Alors tu sais, en Afrique, si on te donne à manger, c'était le cas, on ne dit jamais merci. C'est normal qu'on donne à manger à des gens. Donc déjà, c'était contre tous les principes. Mais c'était vachement dramatique. Et j'ai appris donc qu'un film, si on voulait le raconter, lui donner un côté dramatique, il fallait effectivement le monter par la fenêtre, c'est ce qu'ils avaient fait. En choisissant tout mon lot d'images, les images peut-être les plus belles, et qui étaient beaucoup plus dramatiques que la chasse à l'hippopotame elle-même, et qui était ce phénomène très bizarre qui est une anthropossession. Tu veux le voir? Voilà. J'ai la...
Depuis des millénaires, un village. Un des derniers villages peut-être, où vivent selon des rythmes millénaires les restes de cette race sonraille, qui domina dans les temps très anciens l'empire de Gao. Ces dominateurs ne sont plus que de pacifiques villageois qui vivent de leur culture, de leur chasse et de leur pêche. À la saison sèche, le village part à la recherche de la viande. Grave opération qui exige des préparatifs nombreux et parfaits. Le bois des harpons est complété par des sortes de flotteurs en moelle de sureau qui le maintiendront à la surface du fleuve, pendant que le fer détachable restera fiché dans la chair de l'hippopotame. Gibier abondant et choisi que le génie du fleuve consentira à abandonner à son peuple si celui-ci a bien accompli tous les rites. Mystérieux et éternel sortilège qui met depuis toujours aux prières des hommes le sang des holocaustes. Et le jour favorable fixé par les augures arrive. Ce jour-là, l'escadre de chasseurs composé de pirogues légères, où on vit place un harponneur et deux pagayeurs, s'en vont sur le fleuve à la découverte de la proie promise. Patiente recherche qui entraîne l'expédition sur des kilomètres vers la retraite de l'hippopotame.
Okay, we're not going to watch all of this, but I want to skip to the end because after he watches this, and then I think there's a part where he actually offers a new voiceover that he does spontaneously, a kind of alternative voiceover. But then at the end you can see there's a kind of confrontation at the end. Let's see if it's here, if it's earlier. After they've watched this kind of original version, which he admits, like, he lost control of it, and it's very sensational.
Ouais, ton film. Commentaire vachement excitant, hein. Oui. C'est sauvage.
Jean, c'est vrai que ce film a monté le caractère dramatique au niveau du montage et pour raconter une belle histoire sur la face de la. Mais de l'autre côté, je te comprends hein, quand tu expliques ce côté dramatique du montage. Mais maintenant, bon, pour ce qui est du commentaire, c'est surtout le film est fait sur le commentaire, est basé là-dessus. On ne voit même plus les images, on est plus accroché aux commentaires. Comment est-ce que tu as réagi à ça ou bien comment est-ce que tu réagis à ça?
Comment veux-tu que j'ai réagi? C'est mon premier film. Je ne connaissais rien du cinéma et un monsieur des actualités françaises nous propose 60% sur les rentrées. On n'avait pas un sou, donc on était prêt à vendre notre cul, tu comprends? Mais on était furieux. J'avais honte. J'avais honte parce que c'est exactement contre quoi je pensais qu'il fallait lutter, c'est-à-dire, par exemple, j'aurais jamais voulu montrer ce film à Lamouré, au Sorco, à tous les gens, à Nougou, à tous ces gens, à Bilo-Gaudel. C'est pour moi une honte. Et j'ai jamais osé montrer ce film à mes copains du Musée de l'Homme qui l'avaient vu dans la version longue. Donc c'était une espèce de truc bizarre qui était arrivé. Alors la réaction que j'ai eue était simple, ce que je disais avant la projection. Je me suis dit, ben, il faut recommencer. Et j'ai recommencé 5 ans plus tard. Retourner le même truc en ayant le temps et en faisant un autre film, c'est Bataille sur le Grand Fleuve. Celui-là, je l'ai montré. Et d'autre part, en retenant la leçon. Et la leçon qui est que, effectivement, c'était des gens qui connaissaient le cinéma, ils m'ont appris une chose formidable. Le film était monté par la fin. Le truc dramatique est mis sur la fin. Et c'était une grande leçon de cinéma, puisque j'étais passé entre les mains d'un chirurgien, et puis il s'est trompé au montage, il m'avait mis les jambes à la place des bras, et les bras à la place des jambes. Il fallait donc se débrouiller pour continuer à marcher, et essayer de faire quelque chose.
Sauf que cela ne nous a pas aidé nous autres à avancer correctement. C'est vrai qu'on a, en écoutant ce commentaire, les bras à la place du pied. Et cela, des siècles, ça fait plus d'un demi-siècle que ce film est tourné.
Oui, bon, alors, si tu veux, ce film est passé en même temps que Stromboli. Moi, je suis allé en salle le voir, le bureau de Fellini, et les gens étaient très impressionnés. Alors, c'était lamentable de se dire qu'il fallait cette sauce-là pour faire passer une cuisine qui aurait pu être très bonne, et qui pouvait avoir une autre dimension. Alors, quoi faire faire un autre film.
D'accord, mais est-ce que tu peux me faire un commentaire maintenant?
C'est arrivé, avec ce film-là, il est arrivé à Marseille, une histoire qui était très...
Okay. We'll stop it there. So then they watch it again and he has his new commentary. But I just wanted to show that as one way to sort of have a reflexive mode about a past film by making a new film that shows that. And John Gardner, who made the film Dead Birds, he has a film in which he goes back to the community and we see his reunion with people. And in contrast to that, I wanted to show another way of being reflexive about the conventions of ethnographic filmmaking kind of more generally by Trinti Minha, who is not an anthropologist, but was trained as an ethnomusicologist in addition to doing comparative literature. And she has made films that have been very influential in ethnographic film because they're seen as making this direct critique on some of the conventions. So I thought we could watch a clip of hers, which is a more experimental mode as well. How many of you have seen Reassemblage already? Nobody? Okay, good. So I thought we could watch a good chunk of it because it's her first film. It's only 39 minutes. And so it's a more experimental mode, so pay attention and maybe make note of where can we see or hear her doing a critique of ethnographic film, and what are some of her criticisms of it that we can see coming through in this film. And can we still call it an ethnographic film even if it's also a critique of ethnographic film? Let's start from the beginning.
Scarcely 20 years were enough to make 2 billion people define themselves as underdeveloped. I do not intend to speak about, just speak nearby. A film about what? A film on Senegal. But what in Senegal? The Casamance, sun and palms, the part of Senegal where tourist settlements flourish. In an empore, André Manga says his name is listed in a tourist information book. Above the entry of his house is a handwritten sign which says 350 francs. A flat anthropological fact. In numerous tales, woman is depicted as the one who possessed the fire. Only she knew how to make fire. She kept it in diverse places. At the end of the stick she used to dig the ground with, for example, in her nails or in her fingers. Reality is delicate. My irreality and imagination are otherwise dull. The habit of imposing a meaning to every single sign. She kept it in diverse places. At the end of the stick she used to dig the ground with, for example. First create needs, then health. Sitting underneath the thatch roof, which projects well beyond the front wall of his newly built house, the Peace Corps volunteer nods at several villagers who stop by to chat with him. While they stood down beside him and start talking, he smiles blankly, a pair of headphones over his ears and a walking Sony cassette player in his lap. I teach the women how to grow vegetables in their yard. This will allow them to have an income, he says, and hesitates before he concludes. I'm not always successful, but it's the first time this has been introduced into the village. It's the first time this has been introduced into the village. Woman is depicted as the one who possessed the fire. Only she knew how to make fire. What can we expect from ethnology?
Okay, maybe that's a good
place to stop it. So maybe you can talk in groups. In what ways is this like an ethnographic film? What are some of the criticisms you can see Chunti Minha making of ethnographic film? And is this what kind of reflection is this? And just to give a little bit of context about Chunti Minha, she immigrated to the U.S. from Vietnam in 1970, and this is her first film in 1982. And she had done research in Africa, I think related to her ethnomusicology research. And then her films that came after that are a bit more related to her relationship to Vietnam, such as Surname Viet, Given Name Nam, and then more recently Forgetting Vietnam. Have people seen Surname Viet, Given Name Nam? That one is maybe even more famous. Anyway, but okay, so maybe you can discuss these two films side by side, the one about Lucian, which he's sort of reflecting on his first film, and this other one where she's giving this critique of ethnographic film. How do we see that happening, and is it an ethnographic film? Nice to have some sugar on Sunday morning, I think. Yeah, take as many if you want. There you go, yeah.
Well, three together takes one.
Yeah, no, take more. Okay.
Juste, je trouvais ça intéressant en fait, d'avoir des locaux qui filment, tu vois, qui pour eux est important dans leur village. Ouais, mais d'une manière générale, tu vois. Bon, Bruch, il aurait pas pu faire ça, tu vois. Il était avec ses copains, il faisait des descentes, des cascades et tout, tu vois. Mais d'une manière générale, je trouve que ça peut être sympa pour avoir, en fait, moi, ce qui me dérange dans le film, c'est la présence de la caméra. Elle a un impact, en fait. Du sarcasme. De théâtre,
Da pitanje.
Sam fatigue. C'est marrant parce que tu disais que la présence de la caméra quand tu regardais un film.
Non, c'est plus en fait la réflexion que quand tu es dans ce type de discussion, je me doute forcément que les locaux, ils sentent la présence, tu vois ce que je veux dire. Donc pour moi c'est une question ouverte, tu vois, j'ai pas de conclusion à ça, c'est juste, je me rappelle juste au Liban, des locaux en fait, c'est surtout après l'explosion du port et tout, il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont venus, tu sais, les touristes vont pas autour. J'ai commencé à filmer partout au Liban. Et il y a un phénomène que j'avais vu, en fait, je faisais du volontariat pour aider à la reconstruction. Du coup, moi j'étais dans tout ce qui est maçonnerie et tout, et t'avais beaucoup de journalistes, tu vois. Et je voyais en fait les familles. Le premier jour, en fait, il y avait cette interview très haute, c'est la première fois qu'il la faisait, il y avait beaucoup d'imperfections à leur dire. Et après 2 mois, c'est ça. Et en fait, ils changeaient leur discours selon qui était devant eux. Si c'était des Français, tu connais les Libanais, non, j'ai pas de. Et ils avaient un discours très européanisé. Genre une sans-égo à vous, tu vois, genre avec ce semblant de complexe d'infériorité, tu vois. Alors que comme c'était Al Jazeera, des Saoudis, c'était différent, tu vois.
Dans quel sens?
Dans le sens où, en fait, ils vendaient aux Européens ce qu'ils voulaient entendre, c'est-à-dire la victimisation. Et à l'Arabie Saoudite, qui a une affiliation politique plus importante, ils vendaient en fait ce qu'ils voulaient aussi. Genre, il y avait la présence en fait de. Ouais, voilà, les personnes filmées ont intérêt aussi par rapport. Et forcément, quand tu as une caméra, tu pas naturel. Donc c'est ça que je veux dire.
Okay. Talk together. So what were your thoughts about what we saw from those 2 films? What was interesting? What kind of critiques could you see them making of themselves or of ethnographic film in general? What did you did you like? What did you still find frustrating? Or
I like playing her with editing. It's very interesting. And maybe it's one way of criticism of the classical ethnographic films.
Okay, how so? Say more about how the editing could be a critique about classic ethnographic.
I mean, it's like she's playing with the scenes, and we saw, for example, one scene in a few different ways, maybe just a bit different from the previous one, but it's like the same one, but it's not. And maybe also with the way how anthropologists from that community, anthropologists, I think she said something about their anthropologists presenting their community to people from people like tourists who comes there to see their way of life. Maybe what they are presenting to us. I mean, when I said us, I mean like people from the West, or they're choosing what they want us to see. So maybe it's also the way of criticism. I don't know. What is the real ethnography and the real meaning of those things that we see in the film?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, and I think with the editing, the way in which she is playing with it a lot, so it calls our attention to it. Because when we're watching a film, some editors will say, "Oh, if we're doing our job right, you're not paying attention to the editing." Of course, it depends on what kind of a film it is, right? But if she's worried that we, as viewers, are often forgetting the fact that this is a construction, then a way to remind us that it's a construction is by making the editing really visible in front of us, by sort of jarring us from what we're used to watching, right? So that can be a way of being reflexive without using the voice or putting ourselves in front of the camera. Anybody else have things that they thought were interesting about that? About the film? About film in general?
Well, I would like to say that it looked to me like she is somehow destructive, and she really doesn't like the ethnographic film. I don't know, I just had that impression. I don't know, maybe like she is like criticizing it that way. So.
Yeah, and she mentions ethnography and anthropological fact at a couple of different points, right? And then she has the sentence at the beginning, which she's very famous for, that I think is, "I do not intend to speak about just nearby," that people take up and think about. So what do you think, what does that mean, not to speak about, but to speak nearby? What does she mean by that?
Well, because I think there's like a, what I also wanted to say is how she tackles also the kind of this interventionist kind of culture, as well, which is, I guess it could also be kind of painted by her experiences in Vietnam and stuff like that, when she talks about the Peace Corps, soldier, I guess, I don't know, but also how, what was I going to say, about the nearby thing, how this is what we discussed, how it's kind of it's at the kind of intersection between documentary and ethnographic film, right? Because especially at the start, when she has all these kind of more farther away shots, and sort of how she doesn't really explain to us what is happening in front of the camera, and how there's always these kind of shots, not just of people working, but just the environment and stuff like that. There's less of this element of kind of ingrainment into the culture and ingrainment into the community. It kind of there's more of a distance created between the camera and the sort of the community that she's she's recording footage of, right?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that is sort of the subject of the film is the distance between Westerners who are there in different roles as anthropologists, as development workers, or as tourists, and there's a kind of refusal maybe of this impulse to try to get closer in some way, but more of this acknowledgement of this kind of critique of these different relationships. And I think, yeah, you mentioning her past, her relationship as someone coming from Vietnam to come and live in the US. I think, yeah, we can also think about how is that a particular relationship that's maybe different from like a unique lens to her coming and doing research in Africa. Anybody else have thoughts about that, or about the earlier film, the Rouge Revisited?
I got an impression she's the first one that isn't trying to translate for us what we're seeing. She's just letting us see it, and the only things that she's saying are kind of just more of trying to, let's say, bring us the spirit of what's going on, and not so much explicitly telling us, look at this and look at this and look at this. And what caught my attention was her describing the UN worker. He has his Sony Walkman in the lab, and now this is maybe my prejudice, but I'm kind of, she seems to be connecting more to the people around him than him, and she's othering him in this. Maybe that's because she's Vietnamese, maybe that's because, as you said, her experience going to the US, maybe, but anyway, I feel like she's othering him in that context, which I thought was interesting, which is kind of a turning tables in that situation. While in many other films, I feel like the person who was doing the voiceover would be more connected to him than to the other people that they were observing.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the fact that she mentions the Walkman, so he's listening to some music of his own, is interesting given the fact that part of the soundtrack as well is that there's the local music playing the whole time, the drum beats playing, so it's sort of like, what is he failing to listen to that is presumably like the most interesting thing for her, since she's coming as an ethnomusicologist, right? And I also want to point out that even though a lot of what her voiceover is this kind of commentary on development work and ethnography and things like that, there's also, she is also giving us these pieces of a narrative about the origins of fire, right? So she's still giving us something that we assume is some kind of a local narrative, but it's not only that. So she's interrupting that by sort of making us conscious of the kind of distance with which we're gazing this, because most of us also have to identify with a certain extent, ask us how much, we have to see ourselves in the Peace Corps worker with the Walkman as well, where we sort of choose when it is we're going to pay attention to the culture where we're visiting, and when we're interested in it, when we just want to retreat into our own kind of comfortable world. So, as I mentioned, some of her other films would be closer to a kind of autoethnographic mode, although I don't know if you could even classify those as autoethnography, because she's not quite in the world of anthropology, but surname via given name Nam in some ways is much more personal about her relationship with Vietnam. I wanted us to watch something that was made from the point of view of an indigenous filmmaker, and this is one that I think is fun for us to watch because it's very creative in terms of the style. It's a very playful style. It's engaging to watch, but it also has some very conventional elements of documentary, and then we can see at different points the filmmaker's relationship to the community that he is studying in, that he's making this film about. It's in Australia, so. Let me just see if I can find where I wrote down where I wanted us to start.
Hi, my name's Mark Fulton. You might remember me from films like Seatbelts and Saddles. Are they really necessary? No, what? Oh, what? A couple of years ago I got a little bit angry and I said some things that I really believe in, which is I think the Southern Cross is becoming the new swastika. Got me in a bit of trouble. That's why I'm making this film, I guess.
I actually don't know. You know how we're doing the show about the Southern Cross. I actually don't know what scientifically they are. Could you help me out and explain it?
Southern Cross?
Yeah, the Southern Cross. Right. Are they galaxies, or are they stars, or are they different?
So Western astronomers take the night sky and they divide it up into 88 sections. Each one of these sections is what we think of as a constellation. The Southern Cross, or Crux is the Latin name, is actually the smallest of all the 88 constellations.
Oh, okay.
And it lies within the plane of the Milky Way. So if you're looking up at the sky towards the south, you'll see it in the Milky Way.
Yeah.
You can see the Milky Way right here.
Yeah.
You see the Southern Cross is right in the Milky Way. Right here. The bottom three stars of the Southern Cross are about the same type of star and roughly the same distance. I believe they're sort of in a larger group orbiting the Milky Way.
Yeah.
The very top star, that reddish one, is a red giant. It's very close. The Southern Cross is far enough to the south celestial pole that when you're at certain latitudes, like the southern half of Australia, it never sets below the horizon. It just loops around in the sky day and night, all the time. It never sets.
Wow. That's a beautiful idea, the notion of something never running away in a way, you know. And are they alive still? Is that, you know, like, do we know if they're still alive, or are they, like, been dead for quite some?
No, they're still around. You know, if one of those stars exploded like in a supernova, we would know. Unless it happened in the last, 320 years. That's possible.
When you said 320 years, is that how long it takes for the light to get to us in that, from that place?
So when we look at those stars, we're seeing those stars shining as they did 250, 350 years ago.
Same with colonization in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, very similar, yeah.
The light we're getting is pretty well basically when, Cook took off to come find us in that sort of great English expedition. Yeah.
Dingoes sitting down. Okay. Here's a short history lesson according to Warwick Thornton. Bloke, Captain Cook, he followed the Southern Cross. He followed it for a very long way. He got a bit lost. He went around in a couple of circles, like us. And he found this place called Australia, and there was no one there. And there's a word for that, it's called terranolius. It's the word that says, nah, nobody was there. It was all empty, and so we can claim it. And that's history. So with the word terranolius came the right to plant flags. And this is the flag that was planted. And then suddenly another flag came along, which is this flag. And then after this flag came along. And this is actually the flag that we fought at Gallipoli with. And then this red flag turned into this flag, a blue flag. And then after that flag, hey, everyone needed a flag. So us blackfellas created this flag. And if you notice something about this flag, there ain't no Southern Cross on it. So let's wind back to where the ruckus actually started about these stars. Oh, the cross of deepest blue, with the bright stars shining through, that was raised, my sons, for you, on a skirt of purest whiteness long ago, long ago, long ago, on the fields of far Eureka.
I mean, even the staunchest kind of dimwit Philistine kind of response to symbols, and you know, like, I mean, you look in a swastika, inside that is a crucifix, you know. Yeah. And like, if you look inside a Southern Cross, inside that is that Eureka flag. Yeah. And inside that is the St. George's Cross, the English, you know, the English sort of nationalist thing. So there's, you know, and then there's the church, obviously, as well. Even if these guys are atheists or whatever, if there's something powerful in that symbolism, with the real powerful sense of belonging, it's a new church, it's a new... Crusade. Well, that's the St. George's Cross, Yeah, it is, yeah. But they wouldn't realise, probably wouldn't know much about crusades. Yeah. But somehow it resonates.
Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead. So it's starting. He's sort of thinking about the importance of the Southern Cross to the sort of colonial Australian British context, and then
when I look at that constellation, it can't be touched. Nobody can touch it, and nobody can own it. What they can own is it in its symbolic form, and that's the illusion. In a strange way, it's mimicking this way of relating and idea of belonging that is derived from the universe, the sky. But we've held that as a law for 100,000 years plus. And we understand the ideas of nothing can actually be owned. We all have our own story. Not one story, but we all have our own story.
It's funny, we've just been talking about probably only 230 years of the Southern Cross in a way. Now let's go back 100,000 years and I'll show you a different perspective, and ironically, a new perspective. I don't know much about the saltwater country, so Jimmy here is going to hold our hand and lead us through some of their amazing stories and country.
Who should I talk to? You should talk to Reverend Dr. Mundara and Baroka, and there's more other young people belong to their stories. Yeah. And for Armen, Reverend is like Tuga for that story. What do you call it? Jorpan. Southern Cross? Yeah. Jorpan. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. That's good shot, right? Let's go and look for another one.
when our people talk about the land, the culture, the spirituality of the land, we build the land, we look after, but we also look after the sky. We look after the sky, we call it kapala, the blue sky, right? That is the place. That is the throne for this unseen spirit of the universe that breathes on throughout my people. And I'm not talking about just younger people in animals, but rather God. That's what we believe. About the sacred. They're about sacred, the land and the sky. We have a story about a place called Marajuni. Beyond the sea or above the sky. And we call it Blanco. The place where we, when we die, our spirit go beyond that to meet with this unseen spirit of the universe. This is not to do with Christianity. This is the belief that our people believed before the Christ.
Yeah. There's this old man, Bill Harney, who lives just past Catherine. Every time I meet him, he just blows my mind.
Or black night, or morning, in the Milky Way. Inside that Milky Way, all these stars are related to all the trees, all the different birds, all the animals. I was born 1931, and I grown up in the bush all my life, live off the bushland more. When we learned to become a stockman, small as a young kid, then we were told by the old people to talk about all these different stars. Now the important one was the seventh plus, straight up there, see? Beyond there is the water, called dowry. That's why you'll see the emu bending down to drinking the water.
Yeah.
When he lifts his feet up, he put his footprints there, become a seventh cross.
Oh, so the seventh cross is the emu footprint?
Yeah, that's why it's seventh cross.
Yeah.
They told us all about the creation story, the skybox called Nadi, and the Dung the frog lady, then a rainbow. That's the three who was in this country first. Anyway, where the pointer, that Dung down the bottom, then Nadi up top.
Yeah.
But they're the two that created and made children in this country in the creation time.
Yeah.
When you read the connection will come with the creation story in them rock shelter, that was fitting real nicely.
And only a hop, skip and a jump away from Catherine in Central Australia are my people. Freshwater people, decimal. They're to show something incredibly amazing. In the desert, there's a connection to the Southern Cross, but it's very difficult for these old people to talk about it because it's into secrecy and law that non-initiated people are not allowed to know about.
I don't know what the number on the door was. One number. Number number you. Oro nyoro nungan bingungan bejalu koro lo koro koro endo marike kolla. Lana nungul baru era no balnya.
In the old days, they used to sing really loud and they wanted to make their voice really beautiful. In those days, they used to have 3 or 4 wives. And by singing all these songs, love songs, would make them more proud. But sometimes they were unlucky. But they tried hard. Telling stories about the sky maps, and I call it who we are, and we tell them that we are the bosses. When we want to do the plaque and the stars, we'll have to wait till tomorrow, right? We have to take time because we've got to see what's up there. Then woman, will you? Nanti berinya berpun dengan jago, yang berapa jam? Ni berapa lagi karen? Ni berapa lagi tu yang menjeran? Nak kecuali orang?
Yeah, yeah, orang mana?
Yeah.
The night sky for us.
Okay, let's stop there. So, for you, what? Go ahead and speak in your groups. How is this film? What we saw of it? How is it similar to some of the other films that we've seen, or how does it deal with typical things from that we would expect to see in an ethnographic film? What's new about it, and to what extent does it matter that he Warwick is a member of this clan from Central Australia? Why does that make a difference? How does it make a difference? Where can we see him being explicit about that, or how do you think that shaped his perspective as a filmmaker? Okay.
Non, seulement vers ma belle talent. Ça fait pire en plus.
Non, mais en fait, justement, ce que j'aime bien, c'est que j'ai plein d'amis qui passent une réflexion aujourd'hui. Ce soir-là, j'ai plein aimé ou j'ai pas aimé, tu vois.
Ah oui, c'est sympa. C'est contrasté. C'est mignon.
Ce que j'ai à dire aussi, voilà, je sais pas si c'est du genre remarqué, mais j'avais des yeux qui se fermaient, tu sais, quand t'as fait comme ça. J'ai un peu zappé la moitié. Ouais, je pense que j'ai en fait, j'ai l'impression que quand on fait l'histoire de l'ethnologie, c'était l'histoire des arbres
Je comprends ça. Somehow I will
et à un certain moment, c'était un peu mental, autre que je
non, c'est que je t'imagine, tu sais, avec le singe qui dit pas grave. Tu connais pas? T'as jamais vu Simpson là moi je suis bourré et fatigué.
Moi je suis aussi bourré et fatigué. J'y crois. Ouais, donc à ce moment, marche bien. se séparent, enfin j'ai pas compris d'ailleurs elle a la même envie que le mec, enfin le poste que tu vois,
Non, mais le mec qui a fait le film, il fait partie des...
Ah d'accord.
Les derniers là qui parlaient là, avec les espèces de compagnie.
Ouais.
Le coach. Ils parlent des toits et
Okay, let's talk together. So what were some things that seemed familiar as an ethnographic film? Even if the style was kind of different, more playful than a lot of the films that we've seen.
I mean, something I told that I liked was the contrast.
Okay, like contrast in...
Like you said, something very playful, maybe to catch, the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then going into the deeper stuff. And for me, contrast is what makes things interesting, because you have a bigger repertoire to talk the same subject,
Mm-hmm.
Some of the ethnographic film we've seen before, I felt sometimes they were repeating the same idea over and over and over again, whereas here it's like tack, 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 but to each information there is like a style.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that interesting.
Okay.
No.
Anyone else? I mean, something that's interesting. He's looking at this this cultural issue, or this cultural symbol, basically, of the Southern Cross and its importance to Australia because it's on the Australian flag, and looking at its symbolic value from different points of view, right? But he's still starting with the kind of white colonial perspective as being kind of the most obvious meaning, and then he's taking us on this journey. So if we think about the ways in which some of even the first ethnographic films that we had, they take us on this journey from the west to the east, right? He still is doing that a little bit, right? By sort of first presenting like here's where we're used to seeing the Southern Cross on the flag, and here's maybe something that we can get really quickly about the most recent history of where that came from, how that came to be on the Australian flag, and now we're going to take you into kind of more local meanings that have a deeper history, that have 100,000 years history, right? So it's still a little bit that same trajectory, and yet at the same time, rather than just saying, oh, and here's like the local knowledge, I think something that's interesting about it is he takes us to 3 different communities and shows us that there are different beliefs. So something I think that's unique is not just that there's like the kind of white knowledge versus the local knowledge, but he's showing us the kind of diversity of indigenous knowledge. Is there anything else that people remarked upon as being interesting about the film, or?
You always film himself as well as the protagonist.
Yeah. What did you guys think about that? Was it distracting? Does it add something? What does it add?
No, it's for this modality. I think it's nice because it creates some kind of relationship. It's not like taking experience, it's like a sharing experience, because he leaves his commentary, he says, right, and this is what I think, and so you have the wholeness of an interaction, which makes it more natural and more believable as a knowledge, and believable in the sense that it's improvised rather than scriptic. It's not like, okay, you're going to talk about the sky, so prepare your words, and then give them to us. It's more like because also I like when someone leaves the imperfections, you know, just like a simple example when they're talking in front of the bonfire and suddenly there are two legs like pushing back the fire to the left. In terms of cinematography, this is like a stupid choice, but in terms of here, it's real, it's intimate.
And this is also his journey, so he's present and we see him, and maybe because of that, that's his journey, and he's discovering something new, some new meanings from about that Southern Cross. So maybe because of that, it's important to be present and for us to see him.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, thanks. And then, I mean, I think the use of animation is also kind of interesting, and it's something I feel like I'm seeing happen more in ethnographic film, that you can think about the ways in which it presents these possibilities for adding some visual material to something that otherwise you would have to engage in some kind of reenactment or something like that, and this can be an alternative way of showing something. A last thing that I wanted to show to you is another kind of engagement that could be more of a kind of political engagement, and that would be different types of kind of activist ethnographic films. And I think the work of Maple Raza is interesting in this way because he does research in the region. So his first book, Bastards of Utopia, and his first film, Bastards of Utopia, is about activism in Zagreb, I think in the early 2000s. And then he has this more recent one, I want Maribor Rising. About protests in Maribor, where it's this kind of interactive thing where if you set up a screening at your university or whatever, it becomes this kind of choose your own adventure thing that really tries to be immersive, to give you a feeling of what it's like to be in this protest space, and you get to decide sort of, okay, do I want to get closer or farther away? The Bastards of Utopia site is interesting because, you know, as you all know, if you've ever made an ethnographic film or some kind of a documentary, you end up with lots and lots of footage. You only use some of it. But he does this thing with this website where, again, it's this attempt to be a little bit of a choose your own adventure approach, where you can watch short videos where you meet different characters or choose different themes. And in that way, he sort of is leaving it's another way also of kind of, so he has his film, which is 54 minutes long, and he has his book, and that has his kind of own interpretive frame that he's putting on it, where he's making an argument about what happened in terms of this activist movement. But then by making, basically, I think at some points he's making like his whole archive available for you to go through and look at. Then it gives you the opportunity to spend time to draw your own conclusions from it. So it's sort of opening it up, and he calls it a remixable documentary. So that's something else you might be interested in checking out. Has anybody heard of him, or do you know him personally or anything? He's nice. So yeah, those are some. And this you can't really see very well. You have to sort of set up the screening to come. But so that's all I have for today. But we have an extra hour here, so if people have things that they want to share, Amar is going to share something that he prepared, right? If anybody else has anything that they maybe prepared for that first exercise, or or if you just want to talk about your film ideas with the whole group, or with me, or with each other, we're free for that. So it's sort of relaxed now. And if you haven't seen already that spreadsheet on the shared Google Drive, you can add your information there. And then the idea is that in about a month, we'll have some kind of a Zoom meeting. And we'll try to use that as a way to give people a chance to do something kind of like speed dating or whatever, where we'll put people in breakout groups, especially if they have some common interests or something like that, so that you could talk about what some of your film ideas are, to see if you might want to work together as a group to make a film together, because for one thing, it's beneficial to have a team, because making a film is a lot of work. And if all 38 people who signed up for this workshop are interested in making the film, in making a film, we won't have the mentorship capacities to mentor 38 people. So there will be some kind of a selection process where you, as a group, will pitch the film that you want to do and what kind of feasibility there is for making that film. And if a lot of people sign up for that, then there will be some kind of a selection. But I would say, if you're interested at all, please do sign up. Don't feel worried that you're not going to be selected, because I think what happens a lot of times in these workshops is a lot of people come at the beginning, and not as many people end up making a film, and we really want films. So anyway, that's something that we can keep talking about now. But thank you all for coming today. And Amar, do you want to show what you've brought, and you can introduce it, and if people have to leave at some point, we'll just understand that. But thanks so much for coming today.
Don't worry, it's only 1 hour and a half. So you have like USB?
Yes, I have USB here.
Okay. It's only 3 minutes.
Okay.
I will not give any contest. I just want to see reactions, without me having to say anything about it first, if it works. Okay. So it's the 5 video. No, it's
The first video, or all 5?
It's all 5, but
Okay.
I couldn't put them together, so
Okay.
it's like. You can put the second. before the fifth, the five, and the last one. Until now, what do you think? What do you think it's about? Like, what did you feel like?
Maybe some catastrophe happened, like earthquake, and that the theater is in the first movie.
In the first one
Yes.
with the theater.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If no one has something, the fifth one, you can rename it. It's So now, after the last one, is there anything, new idea maybe?
My impression was that, well, I'm not sure whether the theater was destroyed in an earthquake or if it's still like not reconstructed after the war. So could you clarify that? Do you know?
So this documentary is called Iraq, A State of Mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's about Iraq just after retaking the country from Daesh, the terrorist, which has left the country in like ruins. The documentary is right after the catastrophes, which are also an accumulation of war, the invasion, before that the dictatorships, and the violinist, the cello player here is an Iraqi musician, and his idea is to awake. he's trying through music to speak what words maybe don't honor in a way. So, for example, he will play in Mosul, which was a city taken by Daesh. He will play in destroyed places, just like the theater, and as an act of resistance, of awakening, in a way. So this was to respond to the first exercise, and for me, it's I love it when you use beauty as a mean of talking instead of victimization. The documentary itself is really like dramatic and very heavy, but those few scenes for me showcase a lot of beauty through these people rather than their misery, you know. Just like when the guy begins to think, do you feel like someone to have pity upon them? Or when you see them all together at the end. This is why I made like the four first clips, and then the fifth one, which was a sort of intervention, you know. So I found it interesting in this documentary how they use these local men, and through also in some places of the documentary to talk about misery without stating the misery, but through beauty. And for me, it's interesting to not seek for victimization or chase victimization, because I think like what's important is to relate to people in general. So if you can see their beauty, their strengths, you will see the misery and why we can connect to these people. So this was an answer to the first day in a way, and I was interested to see, like, without any context and anything, what would you think about what you saw. So yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you.
I have one more thing, one more comment, and just basically it relates to how I interpret it without having a clear context, but also how that's, you know, how you cannot escape your positionality and subjectivity as a social scientist. And so, like, the way I saw or I interpreted the scene where, so you see the cello player in the theater and there's no one there, right? So it's like he's playing for no one. And then he plays for all of those men in the street, and those men, I would say, do not really fit the profile of the people who would have otherwise, in times of peace, attended the theater. So this context of post-war and the cello player has no like proper place to play where he's supposed to normally play, and now he's in the streets, and this kind of like gives an encounter that otherwise would have never happened, I feel. And to me it's kind of like I don't know, I interpreted it through the lens of like, class struggle, and because this is like what I think about all the time. So it's really it's just something to be wary of, how like it's your interpretation makes sense, perhaps even my interpretation makes sense, I don't know, but it's just like, it depends so much on your background, and so it's just a thing to be, I guess, wary of when interpreting anything. So.
That's why I showed only the part where there is no commentary. This is why it's roughly cut, because this is only places where there is no narrator talking about what's happening. And I like it when people can make their own mind depending on who they are, rather than be led to Iraqi, you should worry about it. No, don't worry about Iraqi. It's like how you connect with your own problem, with what you find beautiful, with the thing as a wholeness, not just like to be free of thinking whatever you want to think, and to relate to whatever you want to relate, to be inspired by whatever you want to be inspired. So I like it, like when it's very contrasting to what I felt, you know. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, you sort of made your own exercise, which I think is a really interesting exercise of taking someone else's documentary and asking yourself, okay, what would I need to do to that? What would I want to do to that to make it agree with how I think a documentary should be? And we can think back at some of the other films that we've seen through the screenings and think about, okay, if I had all of that material, how might I do something differently with that material? And how can that help me think about the kind of film that I want to make? Does anybody else have any material that they want to share with us, or just an idea that they have that they've been thinking about, that they're interested in developing, or that they've been playing around with? Yeah.
So what I've been kind of thinking about, because I study musicology, so like I'm kind of more like, and my kind of ethnographic experience thus far has been kind of tied to like music scenes and stuff like that, which is very, I do not have a lot of ethnographic experience, and I've never made a film. But, so kind of my idea was basically like, because I have this group of friends that kind of, they have like this kind of like funk band, and they like sort of play certain music. And so what I kind of wanted to do was kind of maybe like sort of compare footage in the sense that like, because they a lot of the time like they sort of record their own rehearsals and stuff, and I kind of wanted to like kind of make this kind of short film into like this kind of juxtaposition of like maybe sort of I didn't kind of develop the idea, maybe like I would like record kind of their like rehearsal on the day of a certain gig or whatever, or maybe just like their general like regular rehearsal, and kind of like record basically kind of juxtapose like this kind of footage of kind of me recording the rehearsal, and how kind of the influence that my sort of presence in the room could maybe exert on, you know, kind of how they act sort of when they mess up, you know, in between songs, in between kind of rehearsal, and then kind of compare that to sort of more archival footage of like the rehearsal when they just kind of recorded themselves, and kind of see like how that is different, and how, and you know, and in the sort of editing software could like maybe like blend that footage and maybe like create like this kind of non-linear narrative about maybe like the day of a gig or something like that. I don't know. Like that's kind of a sort of idea that I've been playing with. I don't know how that sounds to you.
No, I think it's interesting because yeah, it's drawing from this idea that we can use film to make these comparisons that because we're bringing together different clips from different times and putting them side by side can show us something that we don't see otherwise. I mean, so it sounds like you have we'll make it sound more scientific than maybe you want it to be, but do you already have hypotheses about the kinds of differences you'll see?
Maybe I didn't think that far ahead. I think I could define those, but sure.
Yeah, and I guess it's also you can think about, okay, how much do you want it to be this kind of a juxtaposition of non-gig versus gig, or how much of that do you want to use to sort of build up a kind of, I could also imagine as somebody who has done rehearsals, who's made a lot of videos of theater rehearsals, for example, there's kind of a dramatic arc that builds up naturally as you get closer to the premiere of a play, where it's just tensions rise, and then sometimes there can be this kind of explosion the day of, which has its own drama to it. So if you're looking for a narrative, it can be a kind of natural way that you can build towards some kind of a narrative if you want that. But yeah. Do you have other thoughts about that idea, or? Yeah.
I was just thinking about how you mentioned the hypotheses, because you kind of not really supposed to have a hypothesis when you do anthropology, but then you should have one to make a good narrative about the film. So how do you kind of how do you approach that, like this difference that comes from the needs to make a good film with, no one will watch it, no be interested if there's not a punchline at some point. So yeah, and then anthropology that's just supposed to observe, even if nothing happens.
We don't have to have a hypothesis when we're...
No, not really.
Okay. Yeah, I think I think for me as somebody who's had to, whenever I'm applying for grants, it feels like I'm supposed to have a hypothesis.
Yeah,
even if I don't necessarily, even if I feel like I'm making it up a little bit. I'm interested to hear other people's thoughts, but I think as we were discussing yesterday when we went for coffee, we choose certain topics because we think because they're interesting for us already, and we choose to follow them whether we're filming them or just watching them because we think something interesting is going to happen, even if we don't know exactly what that is. And we want to, so I think with anthropology and with film, the reason that we are doing documentary film versus something that's very staged is because we want to be surprised on the one hand, and yet we have this suspicion that something is going to happen, or we're hoping. And sometimes I've spent a lot of time waiting for something to happen, and it takes a long time sometimes. But do other people have thoughts about that? Anyone who has either done some kind of participant observation as an anthropologist before, or who has made a documentary film where maybe you were not staging thing or making something happen. Can you think of a time when you were waiting for something to happen and then something did happen, or where you were waiting for something to happen and then you noticed that something was happening the whole time but you didn't realize it before because you weren't familiar enough with the context, and all of a sudden you saw something that you didn't see before?
It happened once in Lebanon. We were filming B-rolls for a documentary about a stateless girl in Lebanon, and something particular about her interview was this love letter she made about Lebanon, even though this country didn't even give her paper. She loved it nonetheless, and I love this contrast. Just to be brief about that, now if you go to see an independent film festival in Lebanon, it will be very dramatic. We don't have fuel, and we don't have this, and we don't have that, corruption, blah 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 blah, which I feel it's only talking to international people rather than local, because local, we're living it. And so we went to festivals that were not that much international in Lebanon to film some rushes to showcase what she was talking about. And by just being there, filming people interaction, being there, we encountered a group of guys who were doing handstand, and then suddenly out of nowhere they began to do like circus stuff, even though they're amateurs, they're just friends messing around. But because it was the end of Ramadan, so it was like a festive day for everyone was out. No one has money, but we're all out, and those guys were doing like a human pyramid, and we were here like, wow, this is so awesome. Like we came here without any expectation, and we end up coming back to Beirut with like the equivalent of like 2 documentaries, you know. So yeah.
Okay, and that was fortuitous because it was the end of Ramadan, so there was lots of celebration happening. So it was just a sort of a moment that was out of the ordinary. So you had a kind of richness.
It was like we were here at the good place in the good time, I would say. Even though the place we were in is very much like where people would hang out, even though it's not like a festive day such as the end of Ramadan. And for me this was also interesting. It's just more people here. But in a normal day there would still be people, and this kind of interaction would still exist, and it showcased more of a mindset rather than like a show on one time and one time only. This guy would do it everywhere, anytime. So just be between them, you know. Like you put them some Dabke music and there you go, you know. So that was interesting. And all of it visual, like we didn't do anything, we were just like, it's a camera right now.
Yeah, but I think, in going back to Nicola's idea of looking at the kind of everyday rehearsals versus the day of gig rehearsals, or an everyday scene versus a scene on a holiday. I mean, you can even think about those as being these kind of almost natural experiments, or just these situations in which you're setting up some kind of a contrast. And so you can be thinking about, if you only have a few days to film, and you want to be strategic about when you're filming, is there a way in which you can know that there's going to be some kind of a contrast, when there will be maybe some kind of heightened energy happening because of some kind of event, so that if you aren't able to spend 2 years shooting whoever you're shooting, waiting for something interesting to happen, for some kind of a natural drama to come out, you can sort of anticipate when might things be a little bit different today. How might the dynamic be different if I shoot on this day versus a different day? If that's important to you, to have some kind of a feeling of a story. I don't know how people feel about that, or if you want to kind of reject that and just have things sort of roll out and capture the mundane and celebrate that. Anybody else? Yeah.
For my master thesis, I was thinking of how, or what is the role of the voice in shaping a person's identity. And the first thing I was thinking of researching was how drag performers use their voices when they're building their character. But I wanted to do it with the Zagreb drag performers, but they're not the best. That didn't go. Okay, anyways. But the other idea was to see maybe like there's this singer called The Gentleman, and he transitioned from female to male. And I used to know him when he was teaching, I don't know, sax or something at the music high school, and I used to know him as Lutza. And years after, I heard his song, and I was like, oh, this guy looks familiar. And then the dots connected. So it will be quite interesting to see maybe how one of his main identities was and still is, okay, I'm a singer, but how his voice change affected his career and his personal image of himself throughout the years. And that's like one topic to explore in terms of like voice and identity, and the other one was to see like with opera singers when they get pregnant, Some of them have to go into teaching because they cannot stay. For example, there was a soprano that was, I don't know, an opera singer at the Croatian National Theatre. When she got pregnant, her vocal cords changed, and she had to become a teacher instead of like a professional performer. And the fourth topic and the last one was like, in general, in everyday life, how we choose to present ourselves. So there's a different voice we use when we talk to a friend or to a partner, especially like with the unpronounced voices in terms of like whispering, and how do we express gentle emotions, or how do we present ourselves when we're actually giving a presentation or giving a speech or something. So in terms of like color of the voice and what's the image that we're trying to present to the world with our voice. I'm not sure which one, but I'd like to hear if you have any comments on the ones that I've mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, before I comment, do other people have thoughts about that? I think it's really interesting.
It all sounds really interesting.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
But I mean, I think it sounds like with the first two ideas, what you're generally interested. I mean, so obviously you're generally interested in the relationship between the identity and the voice, and the kind of attachment that we have to our voices as being a sort of locus of identity. And with the first two ideas, it sounds like you're interested in like, okay, maybe let's assume that that's true. So then what happens when the voice undergoes some kind of profound transformation, especially for people who are professional singers. So there's something, really intimately tied to that in terms of, and professionally as well.
But also like with, not necessarily just singers, but with, I don't know, people on the radio or television, or even like lecturers. A lot of them have to go and get a surgery or something because their vocal cords just like tear. Yeah. And that's not something that gets talked about a lot, but it's a very like an important moment in your life, because okay, not only is that my source of income, but that is how I view myself in the world. And if I lose my voice, what am I?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thought I have is, if this is the topic for a film, is with the trans singer that you're talking about, for example. That's already happened. So if it's the topic for a film, it's going to be a lot of interview potentially. But I'm wondering if you found someone else who's undergoing some kind of a transition with their voice that is a meaningful, profound transition for them, and you're able to actually follow what does that look like. Like, are they, if somebody is doing some kind of therapy for that or something like that, if that's like a topic that you can then track while you're also talking to them about what that feels like, then that might be one approach to think about how that could translate to a film.
I'd be interested in like, there's this perspective of having a voice and then losing it, but also with actors, they have to find their own voice, they have to go to different classes, and I mean, you know what I'm talking about, but like the other way around.
Yeah.
Not negative version, but a positive version. So yeah, maybe that would. I mean, that's what that thought came to mind when you mentioned having to find somebody that's in the process of or losing their voice. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that those classes would also be, I'm guessing those classes, and then also if if somebody has had surgery recently, for example, and have different exercises, like watching those exercises would be something that might be interesting for us to see, watching the different exercises that actors do before they go on stage or whatever, because they seem kind of they're making funny noises basically to us, and so those are things that might be interesting for a viewer to watch, in addition to having some meta commentary about it. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just perhaps a suggestion for, I think it was your 4th project proposal, or maybe 16th, I don't remember. But yeah, I think it was the 4th one. We were talking about cultural embodiment the other day, and I was thinking how sometimes I really despise my voice and myself when I speak a certain language, French, for example. Like French is really like it I don't know if you could see it as cultural embodiment, but like the tonality of the French sentence kind of like forces you to have this kind of higher pitched voice, and I hate it. Like I hate my voice when it sounds like that. And so maybe it's something you could
that was like
consider.
The 6th and the 16th.
Ah, okay, okay, cool.
Yeah,
but it fits also within the 4th, because it's really a question of identity, and it's yeah.
Especially when you have to okay, now I'll be speaking in English, and you have to switch. You have to like think about how your voice is gonna sound. Especially like when, I don't know, in my French class, and then there's an English word, and then I get a bit anxious because, oh, will I read it with an accent, or will I just go through it? I mean, and those are like little moments that, like, I don't know, are very personal.
Mm.
Again, especially when you have to present to an audience. Yeah, you're very self-aware in that moment. Okay.
Sure.
So lots of ideas. You'll be making lots of films, I think. Okay, anybody else? No. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up now because it's cold.
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming on a Sunday morning and to all of these sessions. They've been super interesting for me, and I can't wait to see the films that that you're going to make and that I can hopefully be a part of in some way. So I'll see you all, I hope, in a month on Zoom, and we'll continue the conversation there. And then, so yeah, then the plan is for the filming to happen early next year, and there will be mentors here who have more practical expertise on filmmaking who will be helping you at different points, and that I will hopefully come back around May for some final edits, and then screening, so we can all meet and talk again then. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.